Hi everyone, it's a daily 10-minute business and finance news wrap for this Tuesday, the 22nd of February 2022 from the SBS newsroom. Later, my interview with the CEO of Cochlear, Dig Howitt. But first to the crisis in Ukraine and how it's spooking global investors. The ASX 200 down 1% today, 7,161. Brent oil is at a 7-year high because energy prices are climbing, particularly in Europe. Just how concerned should we be? And what else is the market worried about? I spoke earlier with Macquarie's Martin Lakos. Martin, to what extent are investors worried about these increasing tensions in Ukraine and Russia?
Look, there's absolutely no doubt that investors are being very cautious. We're seeing obviously sell-offs in global financial markets right around the world on the Ukrainian and Russian tensions. But of course, there's an overlay here as well that we've seen markets come off right through January, also on concerns around inflation and the prospect of the interest rate cycle now turning with the likelihood of interest rates rising. Now, the combination of that is certainly putting pressure on markets, but typically, Ricardo, geopolitical or regional skirmishes tend to have very little overall impact on global growth. And in fact, global growth is still exceeding expectations. And so it's really going to be around central banks playing this balancing act between wanting to ensure or certainly signalling that they've got inflation under control without crimping the recovery. So there's actually a lot going on that investors have really got to be focusing in on.
So given all of that, how's it being played out on the share market today?
Well, certainly we're down again, down well over 1% pretty much across the board. But there are definitely some components of the market that are actually doing very well. So, without the headlines, we are within a reporting season and we're now into the third week. The first half of the reporting season was actually fairly neutral. That is where we monitor expectations and whether there's been company results have beaten expectations or not. But certainly this third week, we're seeing a lot more results beating expectations. And that was certainly the case today. Companies like Best & Less beat expectations, as did Costa and also Monadelphous. And they've put in very strong share price performances, so strongly up in a day where the market is down.
So given that environment, how do you invest? Where are the opportunities?
We continue to really focus on a couple of things. The early stages of an interest rate cycle and where do we get performance? Well, certainly the resources sector and commodities tend to do very well because it's very much a reflection that the economy is doing quite well. The fact that central banks feel the need to move from emergency interest rate settings to more normalised interest rate settings. We've also got to focus on the post-COVID recovery. So obviously companies in transport or tourism are going to do quite well, as are private hospitals with non-essential surgeries coming back into the fray, along with obviously pathology and imaging as well. So those ancillary businesses should do quite well. And we don't think the tech sector is over just yet. Although the NASDAQ is down 16% since late November last year, we're starting to look again at those potential tech companies in things like cybersecurity, in robotics and artificial intelligence. So again, there are some key thematics there. We think this is a potential buying opportunity. But again, caution is very much first and front of mind.
Martin Lakos there from Macquarie. Now, one of the best performers on the 200, in fact, it was the best performing stock today, was hearing implant maker Cochlear, shares up 9%. That's as it says that it sold around 18,600 implant units across the world in the last half. That's an increase of 7%. Most of them, in fact, there was growth rather in implant sales in emerging markets. As a result, it saw underlying profit rise 26% to $157 million, and it'll increase its interim dividend by 35% to $1.55 per share. Its CEO, Dig Howitt, has some interesting observations about the healthcare system, given that he is a health provider of sorts, given they make hearing implants. And I spoke with him a little earlier. Dig, I know it's a broad question to start off with, but what were the pros and cons that the pandemic threw at you in this result?
I think in this result, what we saw was very strong first half sales, particularly driven by our upgrades, which is people who already have an implant getting the latest generation of processor to give them better hearing and the ability to benefit from new technology. So we really saw clinics opening up. and people getting those upgrades. In terms of what was difficult in the last half was hospital operating theatre capacity, and there are restrictions of that capacity, particularly in the United States, and that limited the number of surgeries that were able to be done.
Yeah, touching on that, Omicron really impacted every part of the economy, including hospitals. Nurses had to take time off just like anyone else that was exposed to the virus. So in the markets in which you operate, are you starting to see that start to ease now?
Certainly starting to see the impact of Omicron easing. And as you said, nurses would or doctors could get an infection and then have a week in isolation or so. What hasn't started to ease yet is that certainly in the US, a number of nurses, whether it's through fatigue or whatever, have left nursing. And that's created some gaps in hospital staffing and limitations on operating theatre capacity. That hasn't eased yet.
Do you think that's a potential issue here in Australia?
Look, I think there's certainly some issues here in Australia in terms of hospital staffing and shortages, not to the extent that we are seeing in the US, but we are seeing it in other countries as well.
Okay, let's talk about growth for the organisation. And if it is in the emerging world where you've seen an increase in sales in units, right? What about price? Is that a hindrance, especially in these types of poorer countries?
Yeah, so certainly there is an opportunity for us to grow in the emerging world and has been a good growth part of the business over time. What we do is we offer our products at a range of different prices in emerging markets to cater for the ability of people to pay, or the lack of ability to pay, to try to get as broader access as we can, while still being sensible about how we run the business. So certainly big opportunities, and most of the implants that we do in emerging markets are in children, and there's a combination of governments paying and also parents paying directly as well.
We've spoken about the external world. Let's talk about shareholders, right? What kind of a message are you trying to send to them with that 35% increase in the interim dividend?
So that's a continuation of our policy of aiming to pay out 70% of our net profit as dividends to shareholders. And our message, consistent message to shareholders, is that we are a business that thinks very long term. We aim for long-term growth. We aim to support our customers throughout their lifetime, and therefore run the business conservatively from a financial perspective to ensure that we are able to deliver on for our customers over their lifetimes.
Cochlear CEO there, Dig Howitt. This SBS on the Money stream is provided for informational purposes only. The content in this stream should not be understood as constituting advice or a recommendation. It is not personal advice, and it does not consider your personal circumstances or objectives. You should contact a licensed professional before making any financial decisions.